Coming up on Arirang News, President Moon Jae-in says the suspected property speculation by public officials now being investigated is unacceptable. It's eroded public trust, he says, and damaged fairness in society. South Korea and the United States have finalized a new deal on sharing the cost of stationing American troops here. Seoul will raise its contribution by almost 14%. And a big IPO coming up next week for the South Korean vaccine maker SK Bioscience. And ahead of that, it's broken the record for pre-IPO bids amid fierce competition among investors. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thanks for tuning in to Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. South Korea on Wednesday reported its highest number of new COVID-19 cases in nearly 3 weeks. There were 470 new cases. The second day in a row, there have been more than 400. That raises the total to date to 93,733. There were 3 more deaths, raising the total to 1,648. The rise in cases means the authorities will most likely decide this coming Friday to extend the current distancing rules across the country. And to stop the cases that have been coming in from abroad, the government has suspended the issuing of visas to people on French passports for activities like studying and working. Similar measures have been taken for the UK, South Africa, the Philippines, and Nepal. And ordinary visa-free entry had already been suspended for numerous countries, including France. South Korea will be giving vaccines to public officials and business people if they have to leave the country to perform essential public services or to do important business. This was announced Wednesday by the Korea Disease Control and Prevention Agency. It said those who can get the vaccines include public servants with duties overseas, military personnel being deployed, those going on short business trips in the national interest, and athletes participating in the Olympics. Applications begin on March 17th and must be approved by the KDCA. On a separate note, the Trade Ministry also said Wednesday that it's looking to get vaccines first to business people going abroad to procure semiconductors for vehicles and will exempt them from self-quarantine when they return. In other news, President Moon Jae-in says the massive land speculation scandal involving public officials is unacceptable and that it has disrupted fairness and trust in Korean society. Speaking Wednesday at a luncheon meeting with top ruling party lawmakers, Moon called for systematic measures to root out such irregularities and said the crisis should be used as an opportunity to create a transparent and fair society.
공공기관 직원이나 공직자가 관련 정보를 부당하게 이용하여 부동산 투기를 한다는 것은 우리 사회의 공정과 신뢰를 바닥에서 무너뜨리는 용납할 수 없는 비리행위입니다. 정부와 수사기관이 전모를 규명하고 엄정하게 책임을 묻겠지만 그와 같은 공직자의 부정한 투기 행태를 원천적으로 차단하고 투기 이익을 철저히 막는 등 부동산 거래의 투명성을 획기적으로 높이기 위한 제도 마련에 국회에서도 각별한 관심을 가져주기 바랍니다.
The scandal has become a hot issue ahead of next month's by-elections. President Moon stressed that the government's housing supply measures announced last month should be implemented smoothly in spite of the scandal in order to stabilize the real estate market. An investigation is currently underway into allegations that officials at a state housing corporation bought undeveloped land in 2 cities near Seoul using non-public information before the sites were slated for new development. The OECD has raised its growth outlook for the South Korean economy and the global economy. South Korea, it said, will grow 3.3% this year. It attributed that to the measures being taken to contain the economic fallout from the pandemic. So In-kyung has more.
The OECD Interim Economy Outlook was released yesterday and predicted the Korean economy would grow 3.3% this year. The figure is up from its December forecast of 2.8%. The new number surpasses growth forecasts made by major institutions. The International Monetary Fund estimated Korea's economy to advance by 3.1% this year. The Bank of Korea projected 3% growth. The forecasted growth rate by the Korean government was 3.2%. The OECD evaluated the effective containment measures and the government policy efforts which have contributed to minimizing the economic impact of the coronavirus and its aftermath. Regarding the Outlook report, the finance ministry stated that the Korean economy is widely projected to return to pre-pandemic levels this year, becoming one of the 7 nations to do so among the G20 countries. Along with Korea, the United States, China, Turkey, Australia, India, and Indonesia were on the list. Meanwhile, the OECD expects the world economy to rebound this year with 5.6% growth, marking a sharp increase from its last forecast of 4.2%. The organization also predicted that global output can rise above pre-pandemic levels by middle of this year. The revision is mostly due to faster progress in vaccine development, additional fiscal support by some countries, and the rapid economic recovery of the U.S., as well as increasing demand from its major trading partners. However, the OECD also stressed that the pace of economic recovery could differ between countries, mainly based on the pace of vaccination rollouts. 서은경, Arirang News.
Despite the pandemic, the Korean capital Seoul has remained an attractive destination for foreign investment. According to the city government, foreign direct investment in Seoul hit an all-time high last year, amounting to some $10.2 billion US. For comparison, last year, global FDI plunged by 42%. Foreigners are attracted by the city's finance and insurance industry in particular, where investment rose by 132% on year. As for the source of these funds, there was a 99% increase in investment from the U.S., Canada, and the Cayman Islands. Analysts say investors have been interested in K-quarantine and are reassured by Korea's high sovereign credit rating. The South Korean vaccine maker SK Bioscience is going public next week, and today it's taking subscriptions from investors who want to buy the shares. Competition is fierce, and as of 3 p.m., it's brought in bids worth $52 billion. It set a record for pre-IPO bidding, surpassing the one set last year with the IPO of Kakao Games. Ji-young has more.
Retail investors are scrambling for subscriptions for shares in South Korea's vaccine producer SK Bioscience ahead of its initial public offering next week. Securities firms even saw a flurry of people trying to open accounts so they could join in the frenzy.
Stock accounts should have been made by yesterday in order to bid for subscriptions.
SK Bioscience attracted some $13 billion of bids on Tuesday, the first day of the retail subscription. Submitted orders came to more than 75 times the amount of stock made available on the first day at 6 brokerage houses handling the shares. This is higher than the bids made for Big Hit Entertainment, the company behind BTS, on the first day of its pre-IPO subscription, which attracted around $7.5 billion. And by around 3 p.m. on Wednesday, it reached $52 billion, breaking the record for local IPO bidding set last year with Kakao Games. Starting this year, the allocation method has been revised by the Financial Services Commission to give equal opportunities to all subscribers. Half the amount of shares allotted for individual investors will be distributed equally as long as they deposit the minimum amount.
Until last year, due to competition, shares were given to only those who pay large deposits, and those with low bids were not able to get any. With the changed allocation method, many people are actively participating in the SK Bioscience subscription.
The IPO share price has been set at around $57, which is at the high end of its indicative price range of $43 and $57. To reserve a single share, investors have to deposit at least half the price of the 10 shares, which is around $280. But if the competition is fierce and it is oversubscribed, then the bids will be drawn randomly. Ji-young, Arirang News.
Time now for an in-depth look at the market news, and for that I'm joined on the line by Professor Ernst Lee from the Hanyang University School of Business. Professor Lee, you might be a familiar face on Arirang TV, but joining us for the first time on this program, thank you for coming on.
Thank you very much for having me on the program. Thank you.
Well, let's start with the markets. Wall Street saw a nice bounce back overnight. The Nasdaq was up around 3.7%, its biggest rise in quite a while. The gain on the Dow much more subdued. What's the story in the global markets?
I think it is mostly because of the U.S. Treasury bond interest rate. U.S. Treasury bond interest rate, it looked like slightly down, but as a matter of fact, compared to end of last year, which stayed at 0.5%. End of February, it went up to 1.6 and slightly down. But compared to end of last year, the U.S. Treasury bond interest rate has been on a steady rise. And it has been very widely expected because U.S. government's deficit, fiscal deficit, stood at $3.1 trillion US dollars. Because of COVID-19 and corona pandemic. And also, the new Biden government has passed a bill at the Senate, and it requires another $1.5 trillion amount of dollars for fiscal stimulus package for the government. For that, government needs money, and it is surely expected that U.S. government will continue issue treasury bond. That's why. And then actually, that has a wide range of the impact to other countries as well. So I will elaborate on the impact later on.
Yes, truly a huge amount of money flowing out of the U.S. government, and it's an issue being watched around the world, including in Korea, where stocks started out today strongly higher, but that faded away by middle of the session. The Kospi still under 3,000 points, and the Kosdaq still under 900 points. Tell us about the local markets.
Right. As you said, U.S. Treasury government bond interest rate has coupled with the global markets, in particular with Germany and UK, and especially for Korea as well. So it has an impact to other countries to raise their national government bond interest rate rise, which means interest rate will rise. So with that, I think there's widely expected opinion that this U.S. Treasury bond issue will continue for some time, even though there will be the amount of can be adjusted. However, the trend is very clear, and then that will have an impact to interest rate rise. So if U.S. Treasury bond interest rise, and then that means the other government bond interest rate will rise. So that will have impact to interest rate rise. Then it is negative impact to stock market. So I think towards some time we'll see this kind of trend in the medium term, I think.
And if we look at the exchange rate, the dollar index is at the highest it's been so far this year. So the Korean won has risen quite a bit against the dollar, or at least the rate has. It's around 11.40 right now compared to at the end of last year around 10.80. So what's happening there, and what's your outlook?
Well, in continuation of the previous questions, the expected rise in the U.S. Treasury bond interest rate, I think that has impacted Korean, will surely have an impact on Korean interest rate, because will sparkle U.S. interest rate, and that stronger U.S. dollar means in the weaker Korean won, which in U.S. Korean won exchange rate terms, the dollar won rate will rise. So that's one of the big reasons. And also, if that may happen, in the global market, the money stayed and invested in the emerging market will come back to the U.S. market because they're expecting U.S. interest rate rise. So that's the slight symptom I can watch, and I think it will continue in the medium term.
Yes, we have seen some significant selling by foreign investors in Korean stocks, but now we're seeing prices rising for consumers to some degree in Korea now. We've had commodity prices up, oil in particular, agricultural prices affecting groceries, a direct impact on the consumer. What do you see happening with prices, and what might need to be done?
Well, the oil price has a very sensitive link with the U.S. Treasury bond. So you can judge how the oil price moves. The oil price goes up, and then you can assume that the long-term Treasury bond rate, interest rate will rise. So about raw material price, I personally think this raw material price rise will not continue long, and I look at it as temporary phenomenon because last year, as a matter of fact, in Brazil or Australia, the production of raw material has been down, mainly because there were people infected by COVID-19, and the production has been badly, negatively impacted, and the production amount has been decreased. But I see, starting from maybe next year, I think the production will come back, and it can be normalized. But more systematically, I think the inflation, people talk about inflation, higher inflation, but I have slightly different idea. I think the inflation, I don't think we will have high inflation going forward because throughout this COVID-19, I think there is a systematic trend in the economy. What it means is, the e-commerce has widely accepted the market, and if there's a price, you can compare the price, better price, cheaper price. So because of the e-commerce, the price competitiveness and the lower price, better quality product will be a major trend and will become a new normal. So because of that, I don't think, this is the interest rate, inflation threat will be high. As a matter of fact, all the central bank has been targeting 2% interest rate, inflation rate for the marginal line for them to protect. But so far, no central bank in the world has met that level. So this is my opinion that interest rate, the inflation rate will stay low not because of this temporal phenomenon by COVID-19, but because of systematic trends in the economy.
All right, Professor Lee, a very interesting perspective. Thank you. Great to have you on the show, and we appreciate your insights.
Thank you very much.
South Korea finally has a new deal with the U.S. on sharing the cost of stationing American troops on the peninsula. And today, it revealed the details. Unlike the last one, this deal is multi-year. And for 2021, Seoul will increase its contribution by almost 14%. Yoon Jung-min reports.
Under the new defense cost-sharing agreement, South Korea will increase its contribution for 2021 by 13.9% from last year to over $1 billion. Seoul's foreign ministry said the increase includes a 7.4% rise in last year's defense budget, as well as a 6.5% increase in labor costs for Koreans working with U.S. Forces Korea.
We have confidently negotiated based on objective grounds and logics and maintained the basic framework of the defense cost-sharing agreement. Especially, no new category was created as strongly demanded by the U.S. for readiness.
The updated Special Measures Agreement is effective retroactively from 2020 until 2025, covering last year when there was no deal as negotiations stalled. From 2022, yearly contributions will be set taking into account the increase in South Korea's defense budget the previous year. As for Seoul's contribution for 2020, it was agreed to be the same as 2019, excluding some labor costs that have already been paid. To improve living conditions of Koreans working with American troops, Seoul's contributions will be used to cover more than 87% of the total labor costs of the local workforce instead of the previous 75%. Also, even if there is no deal when this one expires, Korean workers can continue to be paid at a level similar to the previous year, which should help avoid a situation like last year when Korean workers were put on furlough. Seoul and Washington have agreed to hold joint working group meetings on the SMA at a director general level. Reaffirming the strength of the South Korea-U.S. alliance, Seoul's foreign ministry says it will try to have the deal take effect as soon as possible after concluding the remaining procedures. The deal was reached in meetings in Washington over the weekend. The deal was reached in less than 2 months under the new Biden administration, but has stalled for over a year under President Trump, who had demanded Seoul pay up to 5 times as much as before. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
North Korean hackers have been launching cyber attacks against South Korean experts on diplomacy and security. According to a Seoul-based cybersecurity firm, a North Korean hacking group has been sending the experts emails with attachments containing computer viruses. The attachments claim to be about denuclearization and the Biden administration. The firm says it assumes the hacking group Thallium is behind the attacks. The leaders of the U.S., Australia, India, and Japan are meeting online this Friday as President Biden seeks to strengthen cooperation with Washington's allies to counter China in the region. It's the first meeting of the so-called Quad nations. Reports say there's a chance South Korea could be invited too. Choi Jung-yoon reports.
Leaders of the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, or Quad, are set to meet online this Friday for the very first time since its establishment in 2007. Led by U.S. President Joe Biden, Prime Minister Scott Morrison of Australia, Narendra Modi of India, and Yoshihide Suga of Japan will attend the virtual summit. The White House said the meeting of the Quad countries indicates the importance Biden places on U.S. allies and partners in the Indo-Pacific region.
A range of issues, of course, will be discussed. We expect to be discussed, I should say, facing the global community, from the threat of COVID to economic cooperation and, of course, to the climate crisis.
According to India's foreign ministry, regional and global issues of shared interest will also be addressed, with the aim of maintaining a free, open, and inclusive Indo-Pacific region. India has urged the other Quad members to invest in ensuring safe, equitable, and affordable vaccines in the region, in an attempt to counter China's widening vaccine diplomacy. The four-way meeting is seen as a way of strengthening ties to counter China's increasingly assertive approach in the region. Biden has said that he sees cooperation as a central focus of his strategy to deal with China's growing economic and military strength. Showing no sign of softening his predecessor Donald Trump's confrontational measures on trade, technology, and human rights. Washington gave no direct comment on whether South Korea would join the summit. Ned Price, the State Department spokesperson, instead stressed the U.S. will continue to engage with South Korea multilaterally as well as bilaterally. Projections on the Quad Plus include South Korea, New Zealand, and Vietnam, but South Korea says it has not yet received a proper invitation to participate. Choi Jung-yoon, Arirang News.
Reports say the Japanese government has decided already that spectators from overseas will not be allowed to attend the Olympics this summer in Tokyo. But a decision is expected to be announced by the end of this month. And the International Olympic Committee will be meeting over the next few days to decide whether fans will be allowed in the stadiums themselves. Lee Sung-jae has more.
Starting Wednesday, the IOC's General Assembly will be held virtually for 3 days. It will mostly be focused on the rapidly approaching Tokyo Games. Just as it's certain that IOC President Thomas Bach will be re-elected as the head of the organization, the postponed Tokyo Games will almost certainly take place as planned this summer. It's likely the IOC will thrash out detailed plans for the Olympic Games. In particular, the focus will be on whether they'll allow fans into the stadiums.
In terms of spectators, there will be probably a decision towards the end of March, at least regarding international spectators. But beyond that, obviously, it's a little too early at the moment to say anything further, but it wasn't discussed today.
Watchers say it's likely that decision will be made by March 25th as requested by the Tokyo Games Organizing Committee, once the framework has been agreed upon at the IOC General Assembly. Some suggest that the Tokyo Games will only be open to Japanese spectators, meaning no overseas fans will be permitted. Despite vaccinations being rolled out globally, there are still concerns over the spread of COVID-19 through cross-border movement. According to Kyodo News on Tuesday, the Japanese government has decided to exclude overseas spectators from this year's Olympics and Paralympics. Citing officials with knowledge of the matter, the government has concluded that welcoming fans from overseas is not possible, given concerns among the Japanese public over COVID-19 and its more contagious variants being detected in many countries. The report added that the government will make a call in April on the number of spectators to be allowed into venues based on Japanese restrictions on attendance at large events. A recent poll in Japan showed that 3 out of 4 citizens oppose having overseas spectators at the Olympics. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.